Welcome. I'm Ron Baker, Director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Centre, sponsored by Small Church Connections. And this is us, Canadian Small Churches in Action podcast. Today, I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk to a person, a friend that I have known for a few decades. We'll just leave it at that. And he and his wife have been part of a fantastic ministry which reaches into various cultures across Canada. But I'm going to let him explain so we can understand some of that himself. So let's start off with a quick question, Rick. Who are you? What has been your ministry journey, your ministry background? And we'll go from there.
Okay, Rick Love. I grew up in Calgary. My wife and I served in the Philippines with a mission there, teaching at a seminary. Also taught at seminary in Canada for a few years. Currently, I'm the pastor of Intercultural Ministries at Foothills Alliance Church here in Calgary, a ministry that my wife started in 2006. The ministry has gone quite well over the years. So 10 years ago, we started Love New Canadians. So what we do is we help churches develop pathways to Jesus for immigrants in their neighborhood. And we help churches through coaching, curriculum, and seminars.
All right. Well, that was about the quickest overview I've heard of somebody's ministry journey. I know that there's a number of things that went into that. So we'll delve into some of what you've been doing and where you're headed. You're Pastor of Intercultural Ministries. What does that mean? I mean, you're also part of an organization that has been started about welcoming, I would say, other cultures into Canada. But Canada's always had many cultures. So let's just start with that. What are you doing?
So at our church, we just keep asking the question, what can we do so we can have a conversation with immigrants in our neighborhood who we've never met?
Mm-hmm.
And we just try different things that would be appealing to people in our neighborhood. So for example, we do ESL classes. We do a number of those because that's a big interest to people in our community. It's a way that they can get better prepared for school or to maybe a preparation to get a job here in Canada. We do Canadian citizenship classes. We do employment classes. We do parties, banquets, sports, field trips. We do a ping pong club. It's just
love that.
a way that we can have meet new Canadians and start having a conversation.
All right. So what have you found as you've welcomed in a whole cultures from around the world? And let's also go further and just say that you're also working with a number of churches, and you have worked with a number of churches. How many churches across Canada have you?
Well, in the 10 years that we've been working with Love New Canadians, we've been able to work with 702 churches and ministries in all provinces in Canada and 20 countries around the world, just helping them with the next steps, because every context is different, right? Mm-hmm. So we just keep thinking about, well, when we talk with churches, say, okay, who are the immigrants in your neighborhood? What is your church already doing, which would be a way to connect with them? And is there something else you might add that would be a way to begin some of those conversations? So what we do is we help churches explore what they're already doing so that they can be more effective in meeting new Canadians.
Which seems to be a great way to go, instead of adding on and adding on and adding on and burdening people, just saying, what are you already doing and how can you do that?
That's right. Well, like we've worked with churches as small as 25, as churches well over 5,000 and everything in between. But we found we focus on a strategy. Can I tell you about the strategy?
Yes, please do.
So what we do is we focus on, as I've been talking about already, programs, classes that have little or no spiritual content, because we're not trying to, we just want to meet people where they're at. We want to serve them and develop friendships. And then what we do is, out of that, we find people with spiritual curiosity, and we encourage them to come to a class for the spiritually curious. People, we think of that class as like our stage 2. For us, it's friendly people from around the world studying English language, Canadian culture, and the life and teaching of Jesus. We tried to design a course so that people of all faiths or any faith could come, learn some English, learn about Canadian culture, learn about Jesus, but mostly get to know each other. So what we do in that class is we we start with whatever's happening this week that would be of interest to people. So we did like we might do something on Remembrance Day or Thanksgiving or Halloween or Christmas upcoming. We'll do Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day, upcoming election, driving in Canada, getting car insurance, finding a doctor, whatever,
Oh
something
my
like
goodness. Yeah. Makes sense.
just for a few minutes. Then we read a gospel text together, and then we break into small groups and we do an ESL lesson focused on the vocabulary that we just read, and then we do discussion questions. And I have to tell you, Ron, every Bible study I've ever attended, the goal is to understand the Bible, which is a great goal. But in this class, the goal is to use the life and teaching of Jesus to understand our new Canadian friends. So we use the Gospels as a jumping off point to get people to talk about their birth country, their immigrant experience, their families, their education, their aims, their goals, and as we get to know each other, our failures, right? And then we see where that goes. Because they don't come to the class because they want to become followers of Jesus, at least not yet. But they come because they have questions about Jesus or Bible or Christianity or the church. Many come from countries where they never even ask questions about those things. So that's our stage 2 class. And then from there, we move on to stage 3, which is what churches are good at, evangelism and discipleship. It's ESL Bible studies, Alpha, church worship services, it's small groups. So we think of a 3-stage pathway. And stage 1, little or no spiritual content, getting to know friends. Stage 2, for those who are spiritually curious. Stage 3, for those who are close to faith. They're exploring faith. Maybe they're new to faith.
That is a great strategy. And it works in small churches and big churches
Oh,
too.
absolutely. Like, obviously, a large church would have access maybe to more volunteers and more programming, but it's all about what's churches take the resources they have and the building they have, the friendly people they have, and they figure out what can they do to have a class that meets 2 or 5 or 10 people in their neighborhood.
Now, as they continue on, I'm going to jump into a question here, which is, as a church becomes intercultural, actively and intentionally, uh, conflicts arise in leadership, in how to deal with things. What have you seen related to that, and how do we overcome those conflicts? Because we do come from different cultures. There's no question about it.
Sure. Well, that's a challenge. It's not an uncommon challenge.
Mhm.
Is as our church is welcoming people from different backgrounds, especially different cultures, different language, our church is going to end up changing somewhat in its own culture, right? If a church wants to keep the same culture that it's always had, it's going to be hard for anybody to come into that church. It's going
Not
to be
very
very difficult.
welcoming.
Exactly. So what'll happen is that there's just a myriad of different challenges that a church can face, but at the same time, there's just so many opportunities for new friendships, new connections, new ways of thinking about things. So what I've seen many churches, what they'll do is they'll try and figure out what can we do so that when people come, that they feel welcome. So maybe they'll have somebody from that they're getting to know who's become part of the congregation. Maybe they'll have somebody pray in another language, or maybe read scripture in another language, or maybe they'll have flags, or maybe they'll just think of ways to be welcoming, because that's really what it's about. It's about we think of this ministry as a welcoming ministry where we receive people where they're at, and then focus on um, eliminating barriers, eliminating obstacles, right? Because sometimes our church culture can create obstacles to the gospel. And what we want to do is we want to tear down those barriers. We want to create a smooth pathway so that people can come to Jesus and meet him as he's revealed in the gospels.
Is there a perfect culture that we should be working towards?
I don't think so.
Okay.
What do you think, Ron? Is
I
there a
don't think so either.
like every culture has pieces of it? I'll just give you my opinion.
Okay.
Some people would say that uh, that culture just is. But I think there's aspects of every culture that are very beneficial for humanity, and every culture has aspects that are detrimental, right? I think it's totally legitimate for us to think through what are the aspects of our culture that further community, that further development, that lead towards freedom. Um, well, yeah, there's a lot we could say about that.
Yeah, I'd love to delve into that. And I mean, what I'm hearing is that there's a richness that comes out of the culture, um, varying cultures, but it's
What
not easy.
Well, what we find is that when we're getting to know people from a different culture, okay, being honest, so I've been doing this minute for a long time, and I'll be talking with someone, they have a different accent, and they say something, and I'll say, "Excuse me, can you say that again?" Because I didn't understand them,
Yeah,
right? And then I say, "I'm sorry, can you please say that again?" And they say it again. And then by the third time, they're embarrassed, I'm embarrassed, everybody in the whole room is embarrassed. That does happen, right? As we're
yeah.
talking, getting to know people from different cultures and different backgrounds, different accents, right? But if we persevere, we get used to hearing the way other people talk, and then our conversation can move forward. When we're working as a team, it's like initially we'll struggle with the greater diversity we have, but over time, eventually we're able to accomplish far more because we'll have so much more background and experience and ideas that if everyone's from the same culture, we're not going to have.
Mhm.
So it's worth the persevering with diversity because of the great benefit that comes out of it.
Okay, so you've answered a question that I had, is why bother to have many cultures in one church body?
Mhm.
Um, it's worth it.
Well, yeah, it's a big question, but I think at the core, that's what the gospel is about, right? The gospel is about people from every tribe, every nation, every language, every peoples coming together to be worshipers of our Lord Jesus. So it's preparation for what we're called to be.
Okay, so now I'm gonna ask maybe an awkward question, but I'll ask it anyways. You studied Old Testament. You have a doctorate in Old Testament studies. Old Testament, it tends to have different a different ethos to it, where separation from other cultures seems to be there. I'm going to let you talk a little bit about how you see Old Testament impacting the idea of having varying cultures and varying groups of people together under one God.
Hmm. Well, we can read the Old Testament through the lens of one nation, one
Mhm.
people, right?
Yeah.
But also we could read the entire Old Testament through the lens of God creating all people. All of us are sons and daughters of God through creation. God called Abraham to bring a message that would be for all peoples. The prophets talk about all the tribes, all the people streaming to the nation, Mount Zion. So it's like there's a huge focus in restoration in the Old Testament upon all the peoples coming together, laying aside their weapons and turning them into implements for agriculture.
Mhm.
The Old Testament as a whole has a huge focus on God's heart for all peoples, and so regularly, right from the beginning, we see a focus on one nation, but then others are brought into the nation. So even when they leave the land of Egypt to go to the land of promise, there's others that join with them, and it's
Mhm.
like constantly there's literally hundreds of texts in the Old Testament that have this kind of focus.
Yeah, and so we wander out of the Old Testament into the New Testament, um, and what do we find? How would you describe Jesus's approach? And let's go into some of the apostles and the other writings towards other cultures. I'm
Well,
trying to put you on the spot, by the way, just
yeah,
for the fun of it.
because it's true that in the Gospels the focus is Jesus is emphasizes that he doesn't have he's called to the people
Yeah,
of promise, but then the Samaritan woman says, well, even sorry, the Syrian woman says, even the dogs eat the crumbs from the master's
yeah,
table, right? And
yeah.
Jesus commends her faith, and so what we see is that. We end the Gospels with a call for a message for all the peoples, all the nations, which is affirmed and developed, of course, in the book of Acts, so that by the time we get to the book of Revelation, it's a ministry that is beneficial for all peoples, right?
Yeah, all nations everywhere, all peoples, and yeah, coming to Jesus, coming to God, and which is a marvelous thing. Now, so we have this ideal that we're going to be open to all cultures. Um, but I'm sure I come with attitudes that probably are detrimental to welcoming people. What are some of well, give me at least one attitude that we should get rid of in order to be a welcoming church?
Mhm. I like to ask churches, what could you do to be a more welcoming church? Because every church knows things that they could do. At the same time, churches are aware of what they're already doing well, right?
Mhm.
And at its core, I think most of us could become more welcoming just by focusing more on people who are new. It's so easy to talk to people that we've known for a long period of time. It takes sometimes courage or to go up to someone you've never met before and just start a conversation. And it's a tragedy, right? Sometimes people come to our churches and they don't always feel welcome. But I would say that in most small churches, that is not the case. Most people who come to church, they're welcomed. They're welcomed gladly. And we
Mhm.
just need to continue to do that, to figure out ways of not just having a conversation, but how can we eat together, right? What can we do so we can have a conversation and just listen and uh, learn together?
Okay. Now let me move to a more personal approach and just say, take me through the sort of timeline, the journey that you and Patti have been on, um, and the organization that you've formed. Tell us a little bit more about that, but maybe just walk us through how you got there. You can start in your teen years if you want, even. Does it?
Hmm. Well, I'm very well aware of the fact this is a 30-minute podcast, right?
Yeah, well, that's
So,
that's all right. I could cut you off, and we can
okay,
talk
okay.
again sometime.
Um, Well, both my wife and I felt God was calling us to cross-cultural ministry, and we pursued that, which took us to eventually to the Philippines. We both ended up teaching at a seminary there. I taught Old Testament. My wife was teaching English
Hmm.
to foreign students because we had a lot of people coming from other Asian countries to the Philippines in order to get their seminary training and preparation for various ministries in countries like Indonesia, Myanmar, Korea, uh, Vietnam, etc. So um, while we were there, we ended up back in Canada for a while, and we were at a church conference, and the leader of our area denomination, he said something like, "Think outside of the box. What are ways that we could reach people that we haven't connected with before?" And my wife said to me, if things were closing down in the Philippines and we came back to Canada, what I'd really like to do is to be a pastor serving new Canadians,
Hmm.
a pastor of Intercultural Ministries. And being the loving, kind, supportive husband I am, I said, no one would hire you. And
Okay.
I know that my
Okay.
wife is eminently qualified to do this, but I'd never heard of a church hiring someone to do that ministry. But as things turned out, our lead pastor was thinking the same. He'd been to the big grocery store beside our church building and noticed that the people in the grocery store were looked a little different than the people in our congregation. I thought,
Hmm.
this is not this is not good. Our church needs to do better. Our church needs to change. Our church should reflect the neighborhood. And so through that, my wife connected with our lead pastor and started just with one class. We started with one class where we were is an ESL class where we were just trying to learn some English together. And I remember our first, like every week, we weren't sure if anyone would come. We had 5 volunteers, but we weren't sure of any students. And um, I remember one week early on, one of the students came and she said, I wasn't I didn't really want to come today.
Mhm.
I didn't want to get out of bed, but I remembered that people smile at me when I come here. So she
Ah.
got out of bed and came to class so that someone would smile at her. And that's often an experience of new Canadians. They come to Canada and they don't know, they don't have new friends. Most of them have left their families, and many are struggling, trying to speak a different language, trying to find a job. And it can be so many challenges for new Canadians. And so our churches are a great place. We don't compete against the immigrant serving agencies. We see it as a both and. We supply, but we can supply things that they don't. We're able to supply love, and we're able to supply community, which is what new Canadians need. So that's what we focus on is building community. Uh, um, the ministry because the ministry has worked well. That's why we started Love New Canadians, basically because we wanted other churches to experiment with that three-stage model I talked about earlier, especially the stage two. We found it has worked so well for us. Um, and it's like, okay, just being honest, Ron, I've talked with
Mhm.
churches and they just want to get right to the gospel because they go,
Well,
people
yeah.
need to hear the gospel. And of course, we love Jesus. We want people to hear the gospel. But we found that this strategy we found it's very effective because what we're doing is we're always finding ways to meet those with a spiritual curiosity. And we found that when things are working well, for every 10 people that we're connecting with at stage one with little or no spiritual content, four of those will move on to stage two, and half
Oh.
of those, or two out of 10, will move on to stage three. So we're not all about numbers, we're all about people, right? But it's
Mhm.
like the programming is all about a pathway to Jesus. We have program. It's hard to do anything that's not a program, right? But
Yeah.
the purpose of the program
It
is
all
to lead
comes
you.
into a program. Yes. It
Yes, yes,
eventually ends up
yeah.
there. Yeah.
And it's like what we do is our people people tell the people in our congregations, okay, love your neighbor, which is great, right?
Mhm.
And many are really good at that. But what happens is when we can come up with a way of doing this in the local church, a group of two or three or four parishioners, those who love Jesus, they work together, and then we're able to use our strengths, right? Because not
Mhm.
all of us have the same strengths, but we work as a team, and then I think it's more effective that way. It's an incredibly powerful way to serve our neighborhood. And then some people are good at the admin part, or some people can do the teaching, but not everyone can do that, right? But it's like we figure out what we're good at, and then we work together as a team to serve our new Canadian friends.
Okay. That's great. Now, let me jump into I won't call it controversial, but we'll see where we go from there. But as churches work towards understanding other cultures, bringing people in and welcoming them, um, sometimes it appears that it's easier just to start a second or third or fourth service of each different culture rather than pulling many cultures into one.
Mhm.
And well, maybe speak to a little bit of what you've heard on that whole area and even some of your wisdom, what you might think about that.
My wisdom.
Go
Okay,
for it.
so I think that both work.
Mhm.
So I think it's totally legitimate to have to start new churches that focus on one language, one culture. Some of the challenges that come out of that is, okay, what about people who are like second generation or third
Oh,
generation,
yeah.
right? It's so difficult for a church that starts with a language other than English in a predominantly English country, at least our part of the country, to maintain that over generations, right?
Mhm.
Uh, there's a huge advantage in moving towards some kind of intercultural church because we can work together on serving our children, serving our youth, and hopefully we're providing a church that meets the emotional and spiritual needs of our young adults who will continue in faith and be lifelong members of the church serving Jesus. Um, so I would say it's not either nor, but both and. We can do both and. Uh, it's I think it's more work to work towards an intercultural church,
Yeah.
but I think in the end, it's worth it.
Mhm. Well, I've certainly seen and experienced that in some of the churches that I've been to, where there will be a church that is actually second gen people from whatever culture they've come from, and they feel quite comfortable there, but they've left behind, in one sense, the first gen, the new Canadian. And how then do they work? How then do we work together to create um, harmony, working together? I don't even know what my question is here, Rick, but
Mhm.
I'll let you see if you can run with something about that.
Mhm. So I think you need someone else in your from a different podcast to do that one because this isn't my area of expertise. I would just say um, we need to, especially youth and our young adults, we have to keep moving towards creating a church that is inspiring to them, that provides a purpose, a missional purpose, uh,
Okay. Yeah.
as they are striving to figure out who they are and then what role the church plays in their life.
Mhm.
Yeah. I
Okay.
wanted to tell a couple stories, and our
Oh,
time's like running away. And can I tell you a couple
oh yeah,
stories?
please do. Please do.
So we were connecting with a church of 70 people, and it was in Hamilton. And the pastor, I met with him and we talked about starting an ESL class. And so he said, okay, let's do that.
Mhm.
And so they started the ESL class and they only had two people attend. And he was discouraged. And honestly, a lot of churches will start an ESL class and only have two attend. Some have one. Sometimes there's churches that have zero that come to their first ESL class. And I encourage them to just persevere because it's quite common to only have two. And there was a senior in their church that took upon himself this role of letting people know about the class. And so he made like little cards, say a 3x5, where it talks information about the class. And he found local businesses that where he could show those and he distributed as many as he could. And very quickly, that class started to grow, up to 10, 15, sometimes up to 20 people. And this pastor wrote me several times over the years and told me of how this class has provided new life for his church because it was a church mostly of seniors, and this getting to know new people in the community, younger people in the community, just provides an interesting weekly activity. And it's like the church started to grow. And he was just overwhelmingly thankful for this opportunity to do an ESL class and how it had benefited him.
Mhm.
We've worked with churches as small as 25. Actually, now we work with churches as small as like six. But what happens with small churches is some don't have the capacity, don't have a lot of capacity to reach out to new Canadians. So I've working one church, there was around 25 people. What they did is they connected with two other smaller churches that were close to them geographically. And they picked a building that was the most central, and the three churches together worked to start an ESL class to serve new Canadians. And they found some toys, bucket of toys, so that children could sit and play, and they took turns, watching the children. And that class worked. And it was again an encouragement for the people of the church, but also for the community, because it, we always have to ask, what do we need to do so that if the church wasn't there, the community would miss us, right?
Hmm.
All of our churches need to be finding ways of serving the community, all with the goal of showing the love of Jesus. And we know that as we show the love of Jesus, people will come to want to follow Jesus. They'll want to know the freedom that we have. They'll want to find the joy that we've had. And so we have to that I see it as a prime part of who we are as the people of faith, is serving the community where we can. Serving new Canadians is one of the easiest things we can do.
Well, that sounds great. You mentioned that we only had so much time, and you're right, the time's up. But I always try to end our podcast with this one final question. If there was one piece of advice that you could give to a small church pastor leader, those that are working in a small church, what would that one piece of advice be?
So, in terms of serving new Canadians, my piece of advice would be think of what you're already doing. And is there a way to help people in the neighborhood know about that? Or is there a way to tweak it so that it would be a way of serving those who are new to our communities, new to our country. We don't have to, we don't have to, we don't have to create a large program with many volunteers to make this move forward. We can just take what we're already doing and figure out ways of letting other people know, more people know about it.
Well, thank you, Rick. This has been fun. I mean, I've known you for a number of years. I just enjoy your thoughts and your wisdom. And so thank you for joining us today.
Okay, it's great to be here. Thanks so much, Ron.